Yes, I will call the roll. Karina Bowler. Bruce Brenner.
Here.
Chloe Jackson, it sent me an email that she will not be here. Spolinski J. Cox.
Let me know if you got
Here.
any questions.
Ian Kimmons. Charlotte Kinsley.
Here.
Eliana Letran Garcia. David McGee. Lisa Mears. Melissa Newman. Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Here.
Maggie Addy.
Here.
Scott Schaefer.
Here.
Seja.
Here.
Cecil Smith. Rose Tagg.
Here.
Annie Wells.
Here.
Okay, so that is 9, but I'm just going to go back and make sure I didn't miss anyone. Karina Bowler. Queen Kimmons. Eliana Letran Garcia. David McGee. Lisa Mears. Melissa Newman. There are 9 members present.
All right, with that, I'd like to move on to the adoption of the agenda. Do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
This is Bruce. I'll move to adopt the agenda.
Thanks, Bruce. Is there a second?
This is Janine. I second.
Thanks, Janine. All right, can I call the roll on the adoption of the agenda?
Yes. Karina Bowler. Bruce Brenner.
Yes.
Spolinski J. Cox.
Here.
Charlotte Kinsley.
Yep.
Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Yes.
Maggie Addy.
Yes.
Scott Schaefer.
Yes.
Janine Seja.
Yes.
Rose Tang.
Yes.
Annie Wells.
Yes.
And Karina, did you join? Is that you on the phone?
Yes, it's Karina.
Okay, great. And would you like to vote on the motion to adopt the agenda?
For the last minutes, yes.
All right, there are 10 ayes.
All right, the agenda is adopted. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the February meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Bruce. I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
This is
Thanks,
Charlotte.
Bruce.
I second.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Charlotte. All right, can we call the roll on the approval of the minutes from February?
Yes. Karina Bowler.
Aye.
Bruce Brenner.
Yes.
Spolinski J. Cox.
Here.
Voting yes for approving the minutes from last month.
Oh, yes.
Great. Thanks. Charlotte Kinsley.
Yes.
Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Yes. Sorry, couldn't find the mute.
Okay. Maggie Addy.
Yes.
Scott Schaefer.
Yes.
Janine Seja.
Yes.
Rose Tang.
Yes.
Annie Wells.
Yes.
And I think Lisa Mears, did you join the meeting? Are you here?
I did. Are you approving the agenda?
We're approving the minutes from last month's meeting. Would you like to vote?
Yes.
Okay, there are 11 ayes.
All right, the minutes from last month's meeting are approved. Next on our agenda is the committee's public comment opportunity. The Advisory Committee on Housing sets aside 10 minutes on each of our agendas to hear public comments from non-committee members. We ask that each person making a comment keep their remarks to 1 minute. All comments should be related to the housing issues in the city of Minneapolis and, when possible, related to items on the committee's agenda for this meeting. We take notes on all public comments and we discuss them as they relate to our other agenda items. City staff or committee leadership will follow up with any person who makes a comment if a need for reply is identified. If anyone is present today to make a public comment, please unmute yourself by pressing *6 and state your name now, and we'll call on the individuals to make their 1 minute comment. Is there anyone here from the public for the public comment period? It sounds like there's not. So I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is committee membership and talking about vacancies and recruitment. Joey, did you want to refresh? I can't remember if you talked to the group or just the co-chairs about the process for filling the vacancies in the on the committee.
Sure, yeah, hi everyone. I just wanted to flag a couple things. So one is that the city as a whole is moving toward a little bit more of a systematic process for filling vacancies on boards and commissions. So not just ours, but they're moving to having kind of 2 main opening and recruitment periods per year, one in the spring and one in the fall. The spring recruitment period is going to be opening up here. I should have the exact dates in front of me. I'll pull that up. Mid-March, so sometime next week, for all the vacancies that are currently available to the public for boards and commissions. So we just wanted to make sure you knew that if there were other boards and commissions that you wanted to look at vacancies for, if there are people in your networks who are interested in serving in similar ways that you all have. Just wanted to put that out there and make sure that that you all were aware of that. We can circulate the link to where those will be publicly posted as follow-up to this meeting. And then with regard to the housing, our advisory committee on housing, we have a few vacancies right now on our committee. We have a couple organizational spots that we're working to fill. And then there are a couple of other vacancies with Colleen Ebbinger leaving and a few others. So I just wanted to point that out, that we will have some vacancies. And I mean, I know that this time, has maybe stopped working for some people, and maybe we're not talking to the right people since you're all here in attendance, but for anyone who, doesn't feel like that it works for them anymore to be on this committee for the remainder of this year, just this might be a good time to think about stepping down. Not asking anyone in particular, but just this is kind of the moment, one of the 2 moments this year that we'll be looking at, filling any vacancies that do exist. So feel free to talk with me or the co-chairs offline if you have any questions about that. And then the final piece of that is just that the members of this committee serve 2-year terms. And so those will be up. The current terms expire at the end of this calendar year. So all committee members will need to if you want to still be on this committee next year, everyone would need to reapply in October. So just wanted to get that, kind of let everyone know the framework of how that's happening. If you hear from other angles about openings on boards and commissions, that's what's going on. So feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. The other thing that I'll just tag on to that sort of administrative housekeeping is to confirm with everyone that I can confirm that our April meeting at least will remain virtual. You might be hearing in the news different movings of back to work and changes, but I just wanted to confirm. At this point, what I can do is confirm that our April meeting for this group will remain on Teams.
And for those like organizational slots, are those people going to be recruited, or is going to be expected that someone fitting those parameters is going to apply to the to serve on the committee?
Yeah, there are a couple of organizations that are designated, like MPHA, for example, and so it'll just be left to that organization. Like Charlotte, for example, took over, I think, from Ryan. So it'll be up to that organization to appoint someone, and that won't go through the normal kind of recruitment and legislative process. But there are others that are more general, like, someone who serves people experiencing homelessness, or those ones. If you look on our committee website, there's a chart of membership, and it says who the appointing body is for each position. It'll either say it's a mayoral appointment or a council appointment or other, and those are those like organizational designated spots. So any that are mayoral or council appointed need to be approved through the city council approval process. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, I also wanted to extend the invitation to join leadership for anyone who's interested in the group. We'll talk about it again after we get some fresh members. But if anyone's interested in helping set agenda and doing a little work behind the scenes, Queen and I and Joey, I think would love to have your help. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and send all of us an email. All right, so I think we are running a little ahead of schedule, but are we ready to move on to the next agenda item on city initiatives to support renters? Andra?
Excuse me, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm just participating by phone. So could you provide the email address to direct, like you had indicated, if someone was interested in leadership to email? Can you provide the email for me?
Yeah, sure. So you could send me an email. My email address, or should it just go to you, Joey, or should it go to me? Okay. Yeah, it can go to me. My name is Scott. My email address is Scott D. Schaeffer, SHAFFER @gmail.com.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And all right, well, with that, yeah, I think we're ready to talk about initiatives supporting renters.
Thank you. And Joey, can you share the PowerPoint? You got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, give me just 1 second. If you want to just maybe introduce yourself, and I'll pull it up as you're doing that. Thanks.
I can do that. Thanks. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Andra Bosniak. I work in regulatory services. I am the department's interagency coordinator. So I work on policy development. I lead that for the department. And so I am here today just to give a very general overview of some of the renter protections that we've introduced in the last few years. A lot of these reside primarily in regulatory services, but there's also a lot of interaction with CPED, and some of them are actually reside in CPED. So this is not a complete list. This is probably going back to about the end of 2019. And so happy to take any questions on them, but just kind of wanted to give a general overview.
All right, can you see this?
Yes.
All right, I'll just do here, and then Andra, you can just let me know when you want to switch slides.
Awesome, thank you so much. So the first one that we have is advance notice of sale and the post-sale renter protections. These were two parts of a ordinance. At the time, we had seen a lot of increased sales of buildings in Minneapolis to new property owners that would then increase the rents rapidly. And so in order to provide more of a transition for renters and also more stability, while this was happening, this ordinance requires building owners of NOAA properties to give notice to the city 60 days before they are putting their properties up for sale. NOAA properties, if you recall, are defined as buildings with 5 or more units, in which at least 20% of those units are affordable at 60% of AMI. So there are a few forms that property owners have to submit both to the city, both CPED and regulatory services, as well as posting in buildings to let renters know that this is happening. And then for 90 days after the notice of the sale is given, then if any of the if the lease is terminated without cause, if rents are increased within those 90 days, or if the renters have to be rescreened, then they are eligible for relocation assistance, which is equal to 3 months rent. Next one. Also around this time, we had introduced inclusive screening criteria and security deposits. This was an ordinance that addressed some of the obstacles that renter might encounter in acquiring housing in Minneapolis and across the country. This is something that we see happening a lot. We had a big work group of stakeholders who worked in implementing this ordinance and providing property owners with all of the information of how to go about this. For the inclusive screening criteria, it set limits on lookbacks, things like criminal, rental, and credit histories. There was both a criteria that property owners could use, or they could provide their own criteria. However, if they provided their own criteria, they had to share the reasoning for the denial of a rental application, and then also give the applicant the opportunity to provide any context, sort of things that they had done since then, since, you know, whatever the history was that maybe they were being denied for, and provide other materials as needed. It also capped the security deposit at 1 month's rent or 1/2 month's rent if they required the first and last month's rent in advance. And then for the security deposit, if they did both first and last months, then they had to have the option of paying it over 3 months in installments. The ordinance went into effect in 2020. There were 2 different sort of stages for going into it, but we also have a lot of the information online for the criteria and sort of some of the presentations that we had walking property owners through how to comply. Next. Tenant relocation assistance. This was looking at rental licenses that maybe were being revoked or denied or even canceled. So these are basically revocation occurs when a dwelling fails to comply with rental licensing standards. It can be denied if perhaps renters were already living there, but it does not comply with our housing standards, or canceled if maybe more units were being used in a building that were than were actually legal. And so if any of these happen, in order to hold the property owner accountable for the condition of their building, then if it was through no fault of the renters, then the renters would be eligible for, again, 3 months of rent to be able to assist with relocation. So this is just another safety net for renters if property owners are not complying with the regulations and the housing code that they need to do. And so in order to hold them accountable, but not damage sort of the relationships that we have with renters, we did the tenant relocation assistance. And so the benefits were given per unit, and there did not have to be a written lease. Next slide. Single room occupancy. So this was a housing option that was available in Minneapolis in the 1970s that was eventually phased out. It was looking at filling in the gaps on the housing continuum in the city, addressing people who are unable to pay the normal rents, but were willing to maybe share a kitchen or a bathroom. So these were some of, if hotels were available or motels to be transformed into units where people can live at lower rents, but and have that basic accommodation, then this new regulatory framework allowed for that. So these are units that are permitted on parcels where regulations allow 4+ dwelling units. So these are larger lots in the city, 7,500 square feet. If they have a current rental license, it has to be a tier 1 or tier 2, so they're in good standing with the city, and then meet all of the applicable regulations and codes, which might be across several different departments. This was not meant to be sort of a family on the housing continuum. It's looking at up to 2 occupants per room. And for the time being, sort of looking to be operated by nonprofit or government agencies who have experience in this type of buildings, and then being open to eventually changing that if we see that as a very helpful housing model. Next. So the renter first housing policy is not an ordinance. It is and it doesn't require sort of any changes automatically. It is more of a policy that guides the way that both regulatory services and other departments that deal with renters or interact with renters across the city should act by placing the renters at the center of the decision-making process, and then understanding the impacts upon them on all different processes, decision-makings, regulatory actions that we take, and so taking that sort of perspective. There was a lot of changes to communications that were made as a result of this policy within regulatory services. There was a lot of community input, both from property owners, renters, especially before COVID and the pandemic. And the aim is to protect renters from displacement and retaliation while ensuring safe, dignified and stable housing. This is something that is very reiterative. We have worked a lot on this policy within the department and continue to use it as a guide a lot of the decisions that we are making. Next. This was, so the renter eviction protection was enacted due to the upcoming end of the eviction moratorium. There was a lot of worry that people would be evicted, and so we want to ensure that people were given proper notice and that they had an ability to be able to pay back rent if they had an opportunity to do so. Or if they were actually at the time applying for rental assistance. And so this would provide those extra days to be able to show the proper paperwork. So for this, essentially a property owner had to give a 2 weeks notice before bringing any type of eviction action for non-payment of rent. And so it outlined the type of information that needed to be provided to renters. We have here total amount due, specifics around any late fees or charges, and then the name of and address of the person authorized to receive those payments. And then it had to be delivered in person or by first mail class. Next. Time of rent energy disclosure. This was an ordinance that was passed in 2018. It went into effect last year. There were a few other ordinance changes that went around the same time around energy benchmarking in the city. This one in particular required that property owners disclose the amount of energy that is being used in general for a unit in that building. There's a look back of 2 years. This was a large citywide staff group that worked on implementation, as well as working with utility companies to create a portal that would allow owners to provide the energy use and cost at the time that they would have a unit up for rent. And so it allows renter really to have that that cost built into, when they formulate how much they can afford for rent, they know it up front. And then also creating that incentive for building owners to use some of the resources either from the city or from the utility companies to do some energy efficiency upgrades. And then to also protect low-cost households if there are sort of unexpected increases that they would know about upfront, at least in general. This is how much this type of energy would cost for the units. And then this was yet another safety net, also looking at the end of the eviction moratorium, and it was the city being worried about the lasting impact of possible evictions, making sure that renters with low incomes who oftentimes lack legal representation had the right to counsel. It was aimed at renters whose income is less than 20%, 200% of the federal poverty line. And also establish the goal of all low-income tenants being able to having an attorney provided. You know, knowing that legal representation reduces evictions, and then also it reduces the reliance on emergency resources. And so this was a service that then would be able to be provided more upfront, especially for low income, and then also for disproportionately impacted BIPOC communities. I think this was the last one. So I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind of these are some of the renter protections that we have enacted. I think some of them you might be maybe more familiar with than others. We are also looking at with federal funding for housing, ARPA funding, and having a renter protections campaign this year. And so we can also involve this group to just think more through what would be really helpful, working with both renters and property owners to make sure that they know some of these ordinances, both from a renter perspective of the rights that they have, where they can access some of these rights, who do they have as resources in the city, and then also for property owners to actually know the regulations, to know what they have to enforce. And so right now we're looking at a request for a proposal to work with a consultant and develop some of these materials, some of the marketing strategies. With this funding, we're able to sort of go outside of the norm that we usually do, either through emails or city websites. And so we're able to do some, you know, advertising on benches and billboards, and do some more radio shows on cultural radio programs. And so we're really looking at having more of that holistic, you know, how do we get to different communities that might not either speak English as a first language or access things online. And so I can definitely provide more of an update once we have some of these decisions in place and get some both input and feedback on the campaign. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Sandra. I see a few people put their hands up. Charlotte, what was your question?
Hi. So one comment would just be, please consider schools as a place for some of that, like getting the word out. I think we often field calls about housing that it'd be great to have us kind of informed well to be able to refer people. And then related, the relocation assistance. So in the sale one, and then the when the license is revoked, I'm just wondering, my first question is like how much people are utilizing that, and then my second is how would we go about connecting a family with that, and also making sure that before we connect them, maybe we've sort of screened and fielded that it would actually lead to some fruition. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I see Kelly is here, and so I think she can talk directly to the numbers that
Yeah. So right now, again, the relocation assistance is only for sort of a government action that results in a vacate of the unit. So that's going to be a condemnation. It's going to be a revocation. It may be an illegal occupancy that we come across. So right now, and we have a small pool of money that was upfront for us to use for this. And I'd say we've done it about 7 or 8 times in the last, maybe not even that, past year. And again, it's because we control sort of, I can, right now, for example, we're trying not to condemn properties. I mean, obviously we never want to condemn properties, but we're using something called a tenant remedies action, which is, again, is another way to get the work done on the property without destabilizing the family and the home. And revocations, again, we're trying to be very sparing as how we use revocation. So I would say that right now we know of all that. So if we have a situation where there's condemnation, our rental housing liaisons will immediately go prior to that condemnation and start working with the family on relocation assistance. Or if there's a revocation, again, our rental housing liaisons will move into that. So it's not just any situation that the relocation, it's pretty narrowly focused to when the government's role out sort of unintended consequences for the vacate of the family or the house. So if we miss somebody for some reason, you could certainly send them our way. But generally speaking, we're the ones who are causing the action, so we're the ones who start the relocation at our end.
That makes sense.
Sorry,
Thank you.
that was long-winded, but I just
No, it makes sense.
give you a full
So we
picture.
wouldn't be referring to you, basically. You'd already know.
Yeah, but if any other complaints, if you find out, like recently we've gotten a lot more as people, again, the renters' rights campaign is going to be very important because we still know people, we still are pretty clear that people don't know their rights because, you know, we've gotten not a lot of complaints on the limited look back or the security deposit, but, you know, we know that that's happening pretty regularly, or we're assuming. And the sale of a property, just recently we've gotten several renters who sort of found out 3 months, 8 months later, hey, they sold this property and they didn't do all of the necessary protections. So we're operating on a complaint basis. So the more we can get the word out, the easier it will be for renters to file complaints that we can follow up on. So
Thanks. Bruce, you had your hand up?
Yes. One of my questions is, what type of follow-up did the city do after it put in the security deposit and the change in looking for qualifications? Because I was in several different types of forums with landlords where in the past they may have let people with that might have had tertiary criminal records or credit worthiness, and they used to charge a higher security deposit. But when this passed, they just stopped even okaying these types of people. So I'm wondering if the city went back to take a look at the policy to see its impact. Thank you.
yeah, we haven't done that yet. It definitely was something we talked about, and I think we, at some point, especially once these renter protection campaign work is done, is going back and looking at sort of the efficacy of all of our renter protections when we get a better sense. But yeah, so no, we have not done yet an evaluation of whether or not there's been an impact on how owners manage properties based on the ordinances.
When you do that, I'd be glad to weigh in because I have quite a broad reach. And I mean, I know personally I had to turn some people down where in the past I would have let them in. And one way that we did, just so people have an idea, is we would charge like a double security deposit, but we'd give one of the one time back to them if they paid on time for the first 6 months. So that we use that as a vehicle to ensure to lessen our liability, but still let people in if they had some bad stuff in their background, but we were willing to take the risk for a time. So I just kind of throw that out there. Thank you.
I actually had a couple questions. So for the advance notice of sale, you mentioned the NOAA definition. Does the city know which properties in the city meet those criteria? Do we have like a register of like properties that qualify as NOAA that are 55 plus units and are in that affordability band?
Well, we definitely have the number of units, and we have a general idea of where the affordable units are. Yes, through research that CPED's done and sale or rents, etc. But I would say that we don't know 100% of where they are. Some of it's going to be after the fact. Katie is going to jump in. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kelly. I just wanted to let you know I had something to add to it. So hi everyone, and I joined late, so I didn't see most of Andra's presentation, but just in terms of Scott's question, I mean, we don't have like a rental registry, or so we don't know rents for like every property in the city or anything like that. Often with NOAA properties, we've been able to identify what they are based on the age of the building and just kind of the amenities associated with the building, and sort of use that as a proxy for identifying NOAA properties. But one of the things that we have been able to do to get a better sense of what our NOAA housing stock looks like Kelly said, there's been research done. LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, looks at that. Kira has done research to help identify. So I think we have a fairly good sense of what the stock looks like. And then we also have our 4D affordable housing program, and so that's a property tax incentive that's allowed under state law, where we make a small contribution to these two properties, and in exchange, the owner can get a lower property tax rate for agreeing to keep their property affordable for a term of 10 years. And so we do have quite a few NOAA properties now that are registered in that program as well. So often that's another way we can get the word out to property owners in the city about different programs and things like that, is through that program.
Thanks.
I will say that we do plan on doing another blitz or another sort of communication. We realize it's been a while, and we want to make sure that, so we're going to be doing more outreach to title companies, realtors, and owners, reminding them that there's a whole, on the advance notice of sale requirements, which is a 60-day prior to the sale notification, or whatever. Yeah. There's a notification period.
60 days.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is, Kelly, when you were talking about, a rental property that's being condemned, and the city can be on top of that and can be informing the residents of their possible rights to relocation assistance. But for this advanced sale, it seems much more kind of complaint based and maybe reactive than proactive. Is that correct?
It is. Yes, we've established that because of the complexity of actually knowing where affordable, the NOAA housing is, that we'll operate it through complaint and education. So our first goal is educate people so that they know, if educate owners and renters, that if the property is for sale, there's some requirements.
Great, thanks. I had another question, but I'll let Bruce ask first. Bruce?
I'll just say I've looked at a fair amount of properties recently. Not one of them had done a notice. So and I literally tell them, the realtor, or some of them are off market, that they have to do a notification, and not one of them had any idea what I was talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And again, it can be
hard. I get it.
Yes. I mean, we've told them multiple times in multiple ways, but if they're not reading the information, right? There isn't a ton that we can do, other than we will issue enforcement and citation if we feel like, if we're getting if we have a non-response once we find out about a sale.
I have a question.
Yeah, Crainer?
Yes. So with the rental ordinance and all the other bills that that's gotten passed over time, how do renters, because Kelly said, renters don't really know their rights, most of them don't. So when the renter is going through the process of fighting for their rights, and they're using all of these new policies that's in place, how do the renters use these policies? How do they say, oh my goodness, I gotta go use the renter ordinance like, how do they know how to use it? When is it the perfect time to use all of these policies? And if it is, the protection is possibly there, but where would the reinforcement be? Where is the enforcement within those policies to continue to protect renters for the
Yeah.
rental ordinance part.
So thanks, Coroner. Let me take it in two parts. One is we're really making an concerted effort to get so people know their rights ahead of the time, because all of this stuff is, you got to know your rights, you know, when you're walking in the door for the security deposit or the criminal background or the limited look back. You have to know your rights when you're living in the apartment. So our goal is to do as much education as possible. And then it becomes, unfortunately, a complaint-based system because we just don't have, you know, we can't be everywhere at once. But once we have a complaint, we do act on it really quickly and do enforcement that way. Recently, for example, we found out about it was an advance notice of sale. We got in there early and negotiated an extra couple months on the rent increases that the owner was planning. Now, we couldn't stop the rent increases, but we were able to intervene to sort of negotiated enforcement at that point, because we could have leveled some fines, but the owner agreed with us to actually extend the period of the rent increase. So that's sort of an example of how we're trying to jump in and protect renters. But just we couldn't stop the rent increase, but because the ordinance says it's a 90-day window, but we were able to buy a little more time.
Okay. And then what about are there any conversations going on about the rent stabilization? Like, is there any updates on that conversation about the work group?
Yeah, I think Joey or Katie can, or Andrea.
Sure, I can start and then others can fill in. Great question. So the charter amendment that passed in November basically allowed, the voters gave the city permission to consider a rent stabilization policy. And right now, council leadership early in the term in January expressed an interest in setting up a work group with various stakeholders to consider aspects of the policies that exist and what kind of considerations the Minneapolis policymakers should consider. Right now, that's still in the works, kind of the details of what that work group will look like, who should be represented on it, are all still in the works. But it is actively being worked on, and I think it'll likely be kind of moving through council in the coming weeks or next month or two. So I think you can expect it to learn more pretty soon, but it has not been finalized yet. I will say that I think everyone from both, sort of elected officials, the council and the mayor's office and staff all very much intend to engage with this committee as the city's advisory committee on housing in some shape or form. The details of what that looks like like I said, haven't been all sorted out yet, but the plan is very much to engage with this committee as that process of developing any policy proposals moves forward in the coming weeks and months. So that's not as good of an answer, not a clear answer, but I think a more clear answer will be coming soon, but because it's being worked on right now.
Okay, thanks for that update. And yes, because I attended the Senate meeting today, and it's just a lot. So I just want people to know that, rent control is not a punishment to landlords. It's to help bridge the gap for everyone. But landlords that's corporate and he's got all this money, they don't want anything to happen, it seems like. And we want to make sure that people are not being displaced on the streets, and it's only what, a 3% raise or whatever the cap might possibly be. But we don't want people to continue to be on the streets. And so with these same policies, again, that's in place, so that renters do know their rights. When we have the rent control and it gets passed and everything is all finished and said and done, how will renters know what rent control, what community rent control is in? So how will we know, hey, 4809 is a rent control property, or this neighborhood, the Harrison neighborhood, is a rent control community, or this block is a rent control block? Like, how will renters know? Will landlords advertise that? Will the city, advertise that? How will people know the properties that are rent control if it's not out there?
I'll just answer, Karina. This is Joey. I think you're raising really important questions that will need to be figured out because there's not a policy yet. It'll really depend on what the policy says. Is it and whether a policy gets passed at all. If a policy is sort of a blanket percent cap, or if there are different rules that apply to different kinds of policy or properties, excuse me, that will all impact, since those pieces haven't been worked out, we don't really know. But I do think you raise good points about the education and awareness about what's allowed and not allowed will need to be a part of any policy should a policy get passed.
Yeah. So yeah, I would like to, sit on that work group because I think it's important that we have the voice of the renters on there. We need people with good faith on there, no biasness, no conflict of interest, because we want to solve and fix something that is, a detriment to a lot of people right now. We got people possibly, getting evicted somewhere and we don't know because they don't know their rights. And, it's just, I want to just help fix this. And I know all the people on this call that's doing the work want to help it too. So, but yeah, I would love to be on that work group to help, write the policy up to that. So that's my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Greener. I saw Queen had her hand up, but Kelly, were you going to answer the question some more? Talk on that topic?
I mostly wanted to say that this is, that people can monitor what's happening in St. Paul. Like Joy is attending, or you can listen in on the meetings at St. Paul where they're grappling with implementation issues, and they have a work group, a very large work group, and they have public virtual meetings every Tuesday afternoon, right? And then there'll be another forum that's going to be sponsored by the Federal Reserve, also on rent stabilization, where it's going to just be providing community members just more information, which will help then inform the work group maybe or others so there'll be lots of opportunities for input as well as education about rent stabilization. So I just wanted to say that.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Queen. Queen, are you muted? I can't hear you if you're talking. Well, I had another question about the SROs. First, could you remind me when the new ordinance went into effect, and do you have any update on how much interest there's been? Have many SROs been built or permitted since the ordinance went into effect?
Oh, the ordinance is in effect. We have an application process and a FAQ and lots of stuff on the web. We've had people inquire, but and they may be going they're going to have to go through code construction services, most of them, if they're a conversion. So I know that we've had people call and express interest, but I don't know how many people have actually started the process. I know that the county, Katie, jump in, has got plans to build or change some hotel uses into SRO type uses. So it's starting. I imagine that it will be a slightly bit of a slow roll, and I think there'll be less, it's going to take a while for people to catch up, especially if they want to convert like a single family to an SRO, because there's a few more hoops that they need to go through. But if they were to build new, right, and I know that there's money in ARPA or the American Rescue Plan Act, maybe Katie can talk about that, for actually acquiring and constructing new SROs?
Yes, I can add to that. So first, the county has acquired 4 hotels that they are converting, in the process of converting to SROs, and they will be, they have designated some ARPA money to help pay for operators. So there'll be some more information coming out about that in the coming weeks. The city the city council designated $5 million in ARPA funds for acquisition and rehab of SROs, so to acquire properties and convert them to SROs. We have not put that money out yet. We're still kind of sorting through together with the county about the best way to make that money available, but we hope to have a process for awarding those funds sometime I hate to put an exact timeline on it, but we're looking to do it sometime this summer, likely, but just working on some outreach and planning around that right now.
Thanks, that's exciting. I'm just pulling up the KSTP article about the Hennepin County's hotel to SRO conversion. Are there any other questions from the committee for Andra or the other city staff?
There's no questions, but I just wrote a statement letter just now, just to reiterate how important rent stabilization is. Hello?
Thanks.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We heard you. Yeah, and I think I agree with you, and I think a lot of people on the committee do as well. And yeah, that's something we're going to be working toward is making sure that the Housing Advisory Committee is involved in, and you particularly are involved in, discussions with City Council about, setting that ordinance, and just more generally having updates from City Council to this committee in the next month or two is something that I think is pretty important.
Yeah. So it's really quick. I'll just go really fast. I just wrote and said, rent stabilization is important as renters in Minneapolis who spend at least 30% of their income alone need this due to the rise in rents and the rise in displacement. Due to the shortage of housing, decent, safe housing, affordable, and healthy housing in Minneapolis, rent stabilization is needed now more than ever. With this urgency of supply and demand comes displacement as the city grows. Rent control is needed today, as we are finding out so many residents are being priced out of their own communities. As more development is being built, the rents are rising and they're not affordable to many in the state. And having this stabilization support renters stabilization support for renters matter and should be a priority for all renters, no matter how much they pay in rent. So that is my call to action, to let people know that this is important. This is not a punishment to landlords, and this is a needed matter to keep people housed in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Greener. Queen, did you put your hand up again? Are you able to talk now? Is your internet back?
I did. I
Great.
did. I think I got a place where I'm not dropping a call. So I just wanted to say that I wanted to thank, all that great information that was put out there. But my question is, how is this fair that all these things are going on and the community is not engaged? Like, that is always the big problem. Particularly, I live in North Minneapolis. So particularly when people are saying, well, I pay 80% of my income to have a place to stay, or I have to pay 2 times the amount of rent just to get into a place. And then we had someone say, well, we use that as a tool so that people can get in. However, our tent population is growing. I'll say that again. Our tent population is growing. So how is it fair that all this information is assimilated, but not too engaged in these communities? People need to know how to use these rules or policies that have been implemented. And I just think that it's a disservice when people are still sleeping on the ground in below zero weather. And yet I don't see I just don't see enough engagement. And then I wonder, why is the solution that people don't really put a real focus or emphasis when they get in these positions of power? So I just wanted to make that comment and put something like that out there, because it is frustrating for me to hear that all these different great, wonderful informative pieces are here, but yet there are people that don't even know that there's a housing advisory committee that has a shared input. Like I'm not understanding. So thank you. I'll recuse myself.
I would echo what Queen just said. I don't know if it's too late to do this, but I think at the Community Connections conference, I think that our housing committee should be as a panel discussion. I think we should have like a area where people can come. I'm not sure whatever happened to the event that was supposed to happen, to let people know that we exist, but it's needed now more than ever. And people, right now with this call, we should have renters, we should have people that's concerned about our housing, infrastructure here. Like, there's a lot of raised questions. Like Queen just said, is people on the street? Is people about possibly being on the street? So we need to let people know that this exists. And I think that community connection will be somewhere that we should have some kind of platform there to let people know that, it's here.
I think that's a great idea, Corinne. In fact, I just got an email about the Community Connections Conference. I think Housing Advisory Committee should have a table there, and then maybe I'll talk to Karen Moe, who's helping coordinate it, to see. But then again, someone will have to like organize it, right? Have an hour session on the Housing Advisory Committee or what you do, or I mean, so I'll be happy to follow up with Karen Moe, who's the director.
And follow up with Queen too, because I know it was something she wanted to do. So I think that is definitely important to do that.
What I could do, I think when's the conference, in May? So we have another meeting in between. So I'll follow up with Karen today and find out how one gets a session, right? Do we put a proposal together to get a session? And I think having a table there is pretty easy, And so I'll find out how we get a table there, and how if the Housing Advisory Committee wants to design an hour-and-a-half session or whatever they're doing, I'll find out how that happens, and then we just need a couple of volunteers to help sort of design it.
Okay.
And then people to staff the table for the day, and then we can have brochures there, right, Andra? We could put something together about all the renter protection stuff and.
Yep. So regulatory services is going to have all of its division there, including inspections, and so that is one of the plans, to have a lot of these ordinances readily available. I agree. We want to do as much education to the renters so that they know what their rights are. I think one of the things that we sort of come across is we don't have maybe contact information. And so one of the things with looking at this renter protections campaign is also providing maybe a way that they can sign up for, things like e-blasts directly from regulatory services, where we can say, like, there's this new ordinance, like, these are what your rights are. And we work with neighborhood organizations, we work with community connections. We do try to get the word out to renters, but yes, it's one of the things that we do struggle with, given that we have so much information from property owners, and that they're our main point of contact. And so, happy to get any suggestions of like ways of reaching out to renters. And especially now that we're kind of starting to go back into communities and do a lot more community outreach as well.
Yeah. And then to add to that, I think I mentioned this to, Katie too, that I think we should have like a spokesperson, to talk for this group, especially when it's like a really serious situation going on within housing, whether it's public housing residents or it's market rate residents that live in a condo building. I mean, whatever it is, we want to fix it. So I think we should have like a spokesperson who can speak for this committee. I think that if we possibly have that thing at the Community Connections, we'd have keynote speakers, and again, we can have a spokesperson who can speak on behalf of the committee by, letting the public know that, what's going on, and we're doing our best to try to, fix whatever. And then also, like, again, if it's housing concerns that's going on in the city and it's hitting the news, I think we should be discussing it. I think we should hold a special session meeting, we're not city council members, we're not getting paid to do this, but I'm here because I care, and so are you guys. So I think that we should hold special sessions, what we're discussing, how to fix it, what's the next steps, what's the action, what's the call to action. Because again, now we're just going to keep adding agenda items and we're not figuring out what worked, what are we doing? So I think that we're doing a good job as a committee, but I would like to see more action. I would like to see more of a community response, that people know that we're here. We're not just, business as usual and talking. So I just want to, I want to say that. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Screener. Yeah, it sounds like, I think that's a great idea. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat in support of this. So Kelly, you're gonna take a look at how we could get involved at the Community Connections Conference, and then maybe Joey or Queen or I could send out an email to the committee once we know what the options are, where people could get plugged in, finding volunteers, finding people who are willing and able to fill in those slots. Does that sound like good next steps?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Thank
All right.
you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you so much to Andra. This has been really informative, and yeah, I think since some of these protections or some of these rights are the enforcement of them is complaint based, I think they're only as good as the extent to which people know that the rights exist, that they can seek these remedies. So yeah, I really appreciate your sharing the information, and yeah, we'd like to help get the word out in any way that we can.
For sure. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, next on the agenda is eviction defense. So Mary Kachorik from Legal Aid is the managing attorney. So yeah, take it away, Mary.
Hi, everyone. I know some of you, I don't know all of you. I'm Mary Kachorik. I am the managing attorney with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid in our Minneapolis office. I use she, her pronouns. I'm happy to be here. If folks have questions, I think feel free to just ask them as I'm going. I want this to be as informative and helpful as possible. So if you have a question as I'm going along, please just stop me and we can talk about it then. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm planning to just talk for a bit, but I did want to pop two websites into the chat. The first link is a link to Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, just to learn more about us. And the second link is for our statewide website that has legal information for the public. That's lawhelpmn.org. So both of those are great. You should check them out. If you're looking for information about legal aid providers or where to get connected with lawyers or legal clinics, Law Help MN is the place to go. Also, if you're looking for fact sheets or like do-it-yourself forms, things like that, there's a great library of resources on Law Help as well. So I'll start just by giving a little bit of background about legal aid. Legal aid is Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid has been around for 100 years. We've been representing renters in Minneapolis for quite a while. We have offices in St. Cloud and Wilmer as well, and there is a legal aid organization in all 87 counties in Minnesota. Our practice areas, in addition to housing, we have seniors, youth, disability, benefits, wage theft, consumer, tax, immigration, family. And there's always one or two that I forget. But the idea is that legal aid provides like a holistic approach for someone's civil legal needs. So someone walks in the door and maybe talks about an issue with their MFIT benefits. Maybe we'll identify a housing issue as well. So a great thing about legal aid is if someone has a housing issue and has another issue that is a civil legal issue, then someone from legal aid can probably talk with them about them or help with that as well. So narrowing in on our housing practice, we have kind of three core areas that we work in. The first is in health and safety litigation. We will bring a rent escrow case. We do emergency tenant remedies actions for emergency repair cases. And we partner with community partners and other organizations on bringing larger scale cases to secure the rights that tenants have to live in a healthy and safe home. The second bucket is housing discrimination. We have a specific project within our office called the Housing Discrimination Law Project, and that focuses on advocating for the rights of folks who are being discriminated against in their housing on the basis of race, gender, disability, all of the protected statuses that folks hold. And then our final practice area is in eviction defense, and that's what I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about today. We have a robust eviction defense practice. In the last couple of years, we've represented over 600 renters in eviction cases. That's just during the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, it was between like 11 and 1,200 a year just in eviction cases in our Minneapolis office for Hennepin County. There are a couple other providers that folks should know about. So we are MMLA Legal Aid. We have a sister organization called Central Minnesota Legal Services. They receive a different pot of funding, and so we're technically two separate organizations, but their service area overlaps with ours. Folks also know about Homeline. That's a statewide tenant hotline that provides legal advice to renters regardless of income across the state. Two other organizations that folks might know about that we partner with a lot are the Housing Justice Center. They are a St. Paul organization that does some bigger scale cases across the state. And then also recently, Hennepin County has started a new project called Adult Representation Services. And in Adult Representation Services, they are having attorneys do eviction defense cases as well. So the landscape of eviction defense in Hennepin County has changed dramatically with the addition of all these lawyers from Hennepin County coming to housing court and helping pick up some of the eviction cases. I'll talk a little bit now about the demographics of who we serve. MMLA helps folks up to 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. That said, the bulk of our cases, like 80% of our cases, are with folks who are at 125 FPG and below. For a little context, that's about $1,300 a month for a single tenant and $2,700 a month for a family of 4. For the folks that we represent at court, about 80% identify as BIPOC. About 80% have never been to housing court before, and many are young. There's a lot of single moms and first-time renters that we represent. So the types of eviction cases that we see, we help in pre-pandemic times, most of the cases that were filed were for non-payment of rent. During the pandemic, those were put on pause because of the eviction moratorium, and so we had more cases percentage-wise that were for breach of lease, and then recently for people who were holding over or staying too long after their rental period has expired. Many of the clients we help live in subsidized housing, so that can mean they're renting from like the Public Housing Authority, from MPHA. It can mean that they are in a project-based setting, that they have a Section 8 housing choice voucher that they're able to take from property to property. A lot of the folks that we help at Legal Aid are in some kind of subsidized housing. Some of them are tax credit properties as well. We do a bunch of those cases too. So I know some of us were in the meeting. When was it? What is time? Was it earlier today? Was it earlier this week? Who knows? Homeline presented on some of the data that they have seen, that they've collected just on cases in the last couple months. And Rachel from Homeline has shared that about 2/3 of the cases now, just in 2022, have been for non-payment of rent. So things are starting to look more like they looked pre-pandemic, where the bulk of cases that we see in housing court are for non-payment. The eviction defense practice is really fast-paced. Minnesota is tied for 3rd fastest in the nation for how quickly someone can be evicted from their home. The landlord files the complaint, and the law in Minnesota says that the first appearance has to happen between 7 and 14 days from that first complaint being filed, and that the tenant needs to be served 7 days before court. So a lot of the time, someone first learns that they have court and they have 7 days before they have to show up to housing court. We get folks during that period, but if their landlord says I'm going to file, or they get the summons and complaint, sometimes tenants will call us or call ARS or CMLS. But most of the eviction cases that we end up representing on come through our housing court project, an eviction representation project. The first appearance calendars right now are all happening through Zoom. So pre-pandemic, there were 3 calendars per week at the government center. It was a mass calendar with 45 cases per calendar. And now we have all of that is over Zoom. So it's all remote, and folks are participating by phone or using the Zoom app if they have the tech to be able to do that. There are now 5 calendars per week, and each calendar has between 20 and 25 cases. So we're approaching the volume of cases that we saw pre-pandemic. The first appearance calendar is still a mass calendar format where the housing court referee will talk about court, and then the clerk will call each case one by one. At housing court, legal aid has attorneys there. CMLS comes, the Hennepin County folks come. It's a combination of lawyers and paralegals, and together we, do income screening and connect folks who are eligible for our services with an attorney. Right now, everybody who is at 200% of the federal poverty guidelines and below is receiving a free lawyer. So right now, we have the capacity to be able to meet that need, again, with a combination of legal aid. Also, the Volunteer Lawyers Network sends attorneys to housing court as well that take cases, and then ARS through Hennepin County. At the first appearance calendar, there are 4 outcomes that can happen for a tenant. The first is that the case gets settled because we're seeing mostly non-payment cases that would normally involve a payment plan. Things are still a little different now, which I'll talk about in a second, but a settlement can be like a deal to move out of the property. It can be agreeing to do certain things under the lease. It can be making payments at a certain time. It's really open to the parties how they want to settle the case. A lot of the cases that legal aid represents on end up getting dismissed at the first appearance. We have a series of defenses that we bring in eviction cases, things like there's no rental license and it's a non-payment of rent case, or the landlord didn't serve the court papers the right way and so the court doesn't have the jurisdiction to hear the case anymore. Or it's the not the right party, so the wrong party is bringing the case on behalf of the landlord. So there are a number of legal arguments that we're able to make at the first appearance to get the case dismissed. The third option that is happening now because of the current state of the law in Minnesota is that if a person has a pending application for rental assistance, their case gets stayed. So the referee will put a pause on their eviction case during the time that that application is pending. And even though the statewide Rent Help Amend program closed down applications a couple weeks ago, Hennepin County has made their funding through the ERA money available to tenants at the first appearance calendar still. So that relief of being able to apply for rental assistance at housing court and get the eviction case stayed, that relief is still available to renters in Hennepin County, which is a pretty unique protection that we have just because Hennepin County hadn't spent all of its ERA funding yet.
Can you post that link, please?
The link to
the Hennepin County assistance.
So the way that the county, I can post it, but the way that the county is doing it now is they're having, they're allowing folks to apply once they're in housing court. So they're not opening up the applications for folks before there's a filing or before court. They're only having their navigators available at housing court to protect those folks who are facing imminent eviction. I can still look for a link to the county's program. Let me just write that down. Yeah, any other questions? As I'm just kind of going along here, but I'm happy to answer other questions right now if folks want.
Yeah, this is Bruce. I own a fair number of properties. I've never evicted someone, but I have someone who is behind, won't talk to me, won't talk to their caseworker, doesn't seem capable to want help. And I don't want to have to evict her. And that's why I asked the question about the county. I don't want to have to spend the money to file just to get in line to get, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? To spend the money in order, I mean, you get it. So I'm just wondering what other option is out there. Because
Yeah,
I don't want to put someone on the street, but I also don't deserve to take the financial hit because this person hasn't paid, right? So, and won't
yeah,
accept any help to get the money paid, so.
yeah. I mean, two programs come to mind. I think a good first step would be the Tenant Resource Center. They have mediators available, and mediation can be a great way for a landlord and a tenant to communicate better. And the Tenant Resource Center is also connected to both the county and through their rent help funding, but also through just like the standard emergency assistance or emergency general assistance funding. So I would call the Tenant Resource Center, I think would be a great first step. And then the second the second idea that comes to mind would be just that emergency assistance, emergency general assistance funding, which you can still apply for before court. But if there's a communication issue with a tenant, again, the Tenant Resource Center is a great place for that. So I can put that into the chat too. Okay, so we're in court. I've talked about how things can settle out, how things can get dismissed, how there's this stay available now. And that stay is only available through June. In June 2022, that provision of the eviction moratorium phase out sunsets. And so, you know, Hennepin County has let us know that they're planning to have that emergency rental assistance funding available, hopefully through the end of the year. But that stay of the case, that part, that protection won't exist anymore starting in June. And that's not to say that parties can't still access that money and try to come up with a payment plan or a settlement that keeps the tenant housed and, you know, gets the landlord the rent that's due. But that part of the law that folks are relying on now is going to change starting in June. So if things don't settle out, get dismissed, or stayed, the last option is for things to go to a court trial. And a court trial is when the tenants come back and the landlords come back on a separate court date, and each side tells their side of the story. So the landlord explains the reasons why the tenant should be evicted, the tenant explains the reasons why they shouldn't be evicted, and then the housing court referee makes a decision about what happens in the case. So what we're seeing at court now is, you know, folks talk about the like eviction tsunami and things changing, and we're kind of approaching that point. Like I was saying, there's, you know, 5 calendars a week now at 20 to 25 cases per calendar. We are approaching, I think, things are just kind of building every month. So Homeline shared that in January, there were 261 evictions. 327 in March, and as of April 3rd, there were already 92. So the pace of filings is increasing. And for a little bit of context, pre-pandemic, Hennepin County saw about 6,500 evictions, residential eviction cases filed per year. So, you know, things are increasing and nobody knows what the filing rates are going to be. We're seeing more non-payment cases now. And kind of tying into the previous part of this meeting, the renter protection pre-filing notice in Minneapolis is having an impact in housing court. So if there is a renter in Minneapolis who has a non-payment of rent case and the landlord didn't do the pre-filing notice, the housing court referees are dismissing those cases and requiring the landlord to give the notice and start again. And I've seen it where if the tenant doesn't even show up to court, the referees are asking that question of all of the landlords, regardless of whether, you know, a lawyer is there to ask that. So that protection is having an effect on folks' lives, which is great to see that policy, you know, to see that policy in action protecting renters. We're seeing some denials of rent help applications through Hennepin, and there is a pretty cumbersome appeal process, and that the statewide rent help MN program had a lot of kind of procedural complications and things that, as tenant advocates, we found problematic. And the processing time just takes a really long time. So, it's routine for the statewide rent help for applications to take months before they could get processed. And, that's a burden on tenants and it's a burden on landlords. And the advocacy steps that we do at Legal Aid are making sure that renters have all of the documentation into the program. And if the program, has questions about something, that we're able to get the information that we can to get that application processed. And some of the cases in Hennepin County, the referees are making confidential while they're being stayed. And this is great because it means that if a tenant looks for alternative housing in the meantime, that the case doesn't show up on their rental history, or if someone looks into the court system, they won't be able to see the case. It's not like fully expunged, like the case isn't totally deleted. And if someone files something into the case, the record will appear again. But in the meantime, that's providing a great protection for renters who want to have an active housing search. And it's really a win-win for landlords too, to have these cases be made confidential in the meantime, because it means that tenant can look for alternative housing and, maybe move to a unit that's more affordable or better fits their needs. I think what I'll do is just talk super briefly about the impact that having a lawyer from Legal Aid can have on a case. Legal aid or volunteer lawyers for tenants, we will win or settle a case 96% of the time. That's compared to 62% for folks who don't have an attorney. Represented tenants are twice as likely to stay in their homes if we do make a settlement agreement. If a tenant makes a move-out plan, if there's a lawyer advocating for them, they tend to get about twice as much time to move out and are much more likely to have an eviction record expunged upon move-out. If a lawyer is representing a tenant, they're 80% of the time they can get that eviction record expunged. And if there isn't a lawyer, our data shows that only 6% of tenants get that eviction record expunged. So the impact that we have is pretty significant. We are excited to partner with the city to be able to do this representation work. And who knows what's going to happen, but I think we will do our best to meet the needs as they, evolve as things change. That was my spiel. I did it without a PowerPoint. I really did it, guys. What questions do folks have, or what would be helpful for me to talk more about?
Hey, this is Karina. Thank you for being here. You did great, actually. You did great. So I'm following a story right now in DC, and it's related to what you were saying about, the expungements and stuff. So they have a bill going on. It's called the Bill of Eviction Record Sealing Authority and Fairness in Renting. And so it seals records to prohibit discrimination in housing for the renter. And I don't want to go all through it, but it's a lot, but it's actually really good. But they found that they, can seal the tenant's eviction record so that they can continue to find housing, with it sealed. But they put stuff in there like Fair Tenant Screening Act that was used for DC landlords who continue to break the law. And the bill required help from the government agencies who also saw that DC still had a problem with landlords who, breaking the rules. And then they brought in the Office of Human Rights to also step in to find that it was continuously 1,000 complaints that was investigated through other agencies that found that the fair housing rights were, being violated. So I wonder if it was something that we could look into. And if it is there, I don't know about it just as yet. But if it's something that Minnesota could do to protect renters when they're, dealing with that situation.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is Minnesota is, I think, unique in that the eviction record is created as soon as the landlord files a case. So even if the landlord doesn't have a basis to file the case, even if they never served the tenant, even if they are the wrong party, that eviction record is created at the outset of the case, which places a tremendous burden on tenants to know what rights that they have to successfully assert those rights in court, in courts that have too many cases. The referees don't want to take the time to hear things out. And so the logical step policy-wise would be to switch it so that someone only gets an eviction record if the sheriff has to actually go out and evict them. It doesn't serve the public interest for an eviction record to exist before the issue has even been decided in court, or before the tenant has even had an opportunity to be served with the court papers. So I think that would have to be a legislative change, but the way that system works is it doesn't work. It's broken. It's a broken system that unfairly burdens tenants. And in court, if there's a case, I can file a motion into a case to try to get the record expunged. But a tenant has to know to talk to a lawyer or know that that's an option, or they have to be able to connect with a lawyer. And again, like the burden that places on renters is completely unreasonable. And doesn't serve the public interest at all. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
No, no, you answered it. I just thought it was some really good research. And then into that following of that research, they found that the landlords in DC were making a profit off of application fees. And they kind of was, doing this sting operation where they were, charging this really ridiculous amount for, like, say in a condo building, they were putting it on the market as if it was vacant, and then they were charging this fee, but then they went somehow back to the screening process of tenants and was, getting the money through the process that was being investigated. So it's just a lot, but I just wanted to mention that, and then thank you. You did a good job.
Thanks. Queen, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you, Mary, for that informative information. I hope that there are ways that we can get some of that information. I think that the data collection for evictions and the process is great to have. I know that a while back, there were information that had not been assimilated to the community that evictions, when they have been settled, should only go on a person's housing record. This eviction process should only go on the housing record for 1 year. I think that information was released from the state, and I don't know if that is still current, where they can only put an eviction on you for 1 year. I do have the document. I would have to go in my emails and pull that information out. And I also wanted to say that I have a group of people who are experiencing their rent is attached to their utility bills now, and that is the new I don't want to say way or new problematic how can I say this? So the landlord actually is a developer, and he has partnered with Excel, and his tenants often have rent fluctuations. He owns several buildings from Cedar Riverside to Brooklyn Park. And the issue is that these buildings were funded with new market tax credit dollars, and the individuals are being their rents fluctuate so much that if the rent is $900, it would be $1,100 or $1,000. If it was in January, it would have been $900. In February, it'd have been $1,000. In March, it would have been, $1,100. It fluctuates because the landlords are now partnering some kind of way with Xcel Energy, and based on their usage, that's how they're adding this on to their rents, which is causing people who are on a limited income of SSI and have some sort of rent subsidy. It is increasing the amount of rent that the person is having, and it's causing them to go to evictions at the end. That's what they're doing. They're being evicted. And so there is about 85 people who are affected by just in Brooklyn Park. There is over 4,000 people who rent in Cedar Riverside. So that issue, the issue that is happening all over, and we would like to have the number to legal aid or someone to speak with those residents. And I'm gonna recuse myself. Thank you for your information.
Yeah, so legal aid has been helping with renters who have that exact problem where a landlord starts billing their utilities and calling it rent, and then folks don't know what their rent is going to be every month. And then folks who are on a set income aren't able to make that payment. We've seen landlords who are doing this to finance like a solar garden on the top of a building. That's one of the landlords that we are have a case against now has been putting the charges for, this green energy, which is great, like solar gardens are great, but tenants shouldn't have to be the ones to pay for it. That should be on the landlord. And, the folks that we're helping are on Section 8, like they can't afford these to finance these building improvements, and they shouldn't have to. The landlord, if they want to be a utility, if they want the utilities to go through the landlord, there are super specific rules that they have to follow. And a lot of times landlords don't do it correctly. If it is a duplex or a triplex, or if it's a building that uses like a multi-unit building, like one of the larger ones, there are really specific rules that the law says about how they can calculate that billing, what notice they have to give to tenants, so tenants know kind of what their bill is going to be and can budget for it. And the penalties for landlords who don't follow those laws are really steep. And just if we're thinking about eviction cases, utilities aren't rent. Utilities are, rent is defined in the law, and utilities shouldn't be considered rent because they're not. If the landlord is, acting as is kind of cutting off that tenant's direct access to the utility provider, then that can also affect the tenant's ability to get, to qualify for programs for utility relief, like help paying their bills. So long-winded way of saying, like, yes, legal aid for sure wants to talk to those tenants. It's an issue we're already working on. We have an attorney in-house who's like the statewide expert on these things. So I will put our intake number in the chat right now.
Thanks. Charlotte, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for all this. A few just really quick questions. So the first is the ERA funding that Hennepin has. Do you have any idea, or maybe anybody on the call, like where that's at? Like, are we close to running out of that also? Is that gonna last through the moratorium? Do you have any sense, or does anybody on the call have a sense?
Yeah, I just spoke with someone from the county earlier today on that question, and she said that they anticipate having it available just in this limited capacity for renters who are in housing court facing imminent eviction, that they're, with the way that they're running that program now, they anticipate having those funds through December of 2022. So they've limited it to, I think, 50% AMI maybe, and she was thinking it might be, they might adjust that too. But the goal is to have that protection there for renters at housing court through the end of the year.
That's great. And then my second question was, are people, I'm sorry if you said this, are people showing up for court? I know that was a big issue for getting those funds and getting the representation, as people weren't showing up. And I'm wondering what trends you're seeing there.
Yeah, I think the default rate has kind of fluctuated. During the pandemic, the court was saying that, it was actually better than it was pre-pandemic, which in some ways makes sense because instead of having the burden of going down to the government center, paying for parking, folks are able to do it from their phone or from their, device to get the Zoom video access. I can pull up the numbers and share. I just don't know what they are off the top of my head. I think a problem we're seeing is folks connecting late and the court finding them in default, even though they've shown up to the calendar, they're just a little late and their case has already been called, which is frustrating, from where we sit because it's a mass calendar where you've got like 20 to 25 cases and there's no reason they have to call the cases for the folks who aren't there at the beginning. That's a choice that the courts are making to get those cases called. And it sucks because sometimes people show up late and then their case has already been called and then we have to file a paper into the case and get it reopened. And so I don't know, there are definitely defaults in every calendar. And it's the same issue that it was when we were in person, that folks just don't come.
And then my last question is, when you were talking about that, like default that the eviction goes on the record, and that it's on the tenant to get that removed regardless of the judgment, is that a state controlled issue? Could a city do it different? Like who decides on that, like how that process works?
So the courts have a retention schedule for how they keep eviction records. I think that it could be a decision that the courts make, how they want to deal with the records of eviction cases. The 1 year time frame is like technically if an eviction case happens and there's no money judgment at the end, like the court doesn't say, this person owes this person money. After a year, the court's own policy says that those cases should be deleted and expunged. And the court doesn't do that unless the tenant asks for it. So, I mean, the part of it is advocacy with the court system to say, like, follow your own policies. Maybe they were doing it or maybe they've changed that practice, but, in my last update is that they would periodically, sometimes clear out the old ones, but they weren't adhering to this 1 year time frame that they had committed to in their like official retention schedule thing. Yeah, and I think that could be, the courts have the authority to manage their own cases. And so if a court wanted to make all eviction cases confidential at filing, the court, I would argue, has the power to do that because they have the power to manage how they keep their own records. They have the power to decide we're going to, delete old eviction cases after a year. They could, do the same thing on the front end too. It sucks because, Minneapolis has done what it can for how landlords can look at those files and what they can consider and can't consider when they're looking at a prospective tenant. But it comes down to like state law and how the courts work to determine what shows up if someone looks for a case or looks for a tenant in the court system records.
Thank you.
Do any other committee members have any questions for Mary? All right. With that, yeah, thanks, Mary. I think we all appreciate the information a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll put those additional follow-up items in the chat right now.
Great, thank you. All right, next on the agenda is the Stable Homes, Stable Schools overview with Charlotte.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm able to share my own screen, right? I can just do that.
Yeah, Charlotte, if you can, I'm having some trouble loading your PowerPoint. So if you can share your own, that would be best, I think.
Yeah,
Do you know how to do that?
Yep. Let me me just pull it up here. So I think what we wanted to do today was just do a quick sort of quick review on stable home, stable schools, but also just give an update on where things are at and like any trends that we've seen related to the eviction moratorium and rent help MN, etc. So Stable Home, Stable Schools is a partnership with the City of Minneapolis and with the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority and Minneapolis Public Schools. And the Housing Authority and the city provide the funding for the most part. POLAD Foundation helps as well, and Homework Starts with Home. There's two parts of the initiative. And the first is rental assistance, and that's ongoing rental assistance for families who are currently homeless. And it's 3 years of support. The YMCA provides wraparound services for those families. So they pay similar to what like a Section 8 voucher, 30 to 40% of their income goes toward their rent. And then they're working on sort of a transition plan for after that 3 years. We did do an extension 4th year for families because of COVID and everything that happened with COVID. So we have some families just starting that 4th year. We currently have right now just under 100 families housed through this part of the program, and we have about another 20 that are in housing search, and we are regularly referring about 6 families every month to this. We don't have enough slots for every family that's experiencing homelessness, so we do have to prioritize families for that referral. It's available, both parts of the initiative are available to 19 different schools now. Actually, I need to update this. I'm sorry, we took Anderson off. And we added Marcy. And we also added Bancroft. So those are 2 additions to what this chart is showing. I'm going to share this with you, or hopefully Katie or Joey can share this with you all so that you can, if you have questions or want to look at it more deeply, you certainly can. But these are the schools that are involved in the initiative. Because we do have to prioritize, here's just a little summary of how we do that. So if we have 2 different families and we have 1 opening, we go through a screening for sort of who to prioritize first for that referral. So we're looking at the academic needs of the student, we're looking at housing history and history of homelessness, and then we're using that to prioritize who to refer. One of the things that I think is a really important gap that this program fills is we use the education definition of homeless, meaning families who are in motels or families who are couch hopping, going place to place, are considered for this program, where a lot of our homeless response system does not count those students as homeless. And so I think it is meeting a really important need in our community. So of those that we've referred, only about 32% of families would actually have qualified for our traditional housing response system through coordinated entry. So I think it's filling a really important gap. And then the other part, and the part maybe that that is most important to spend just a little bit of time on, is our housing stability. So that is one-time assistance to prevent an episode of homelessness or to move somebody into housing that needs just one-time assistance to move in. And so we've been monitoring. We were kind of thinking that we would see a big increase when Rent Help MN closed, and we actually have not seen that. We've seen a slow uptick, but not a dramatic jump in requests. I'm sure you all know that school is not in session in Minneapolis Public Schools right now because of the teacher strike, and so social workers are our point of referral for both of these initiatives. So that is one thing that we are looking at, that if this extends much longer, we're going to have an alternative way to refer families. I really hope that doesn't happen and that that we get back in session soon, but we have our eye on coming up with a different plan. So we definitely wouldn't be getting referrals right now with social workers being on strike. And I think that is, then there's some other things that I'm just going to share when you get the PowerPoint, but those were the things that I wanted to actually show you all. And I'll just pause if anyone has questions or thoughts.
Lisa, I see your hand up. Lisa Mears.
Thank you. Hi, Charlotte. Thanks for the presentation. Have you seen an increase in the number of youth experiencing homelessness this school year?
No, we have not. Our numbers are actually lower than they have been. They are increasing right now, just like our shelter numbers are increasing. So we do see kind of we're aligning with what we're seeing in shelters as shelter numbers are increasing. So are our doubled up couch hopping motel numbers. But no, we are still below where we would traditionally be pre-COVID.
Thank you.
Charlotte, do you think that's because of the eviction moratorium?
I think that is part of it. I think that's probably the main part of it. I also know that during COVID, we lost a lot of students and we weren't identifying students. And so that's the part that I don't know quite as much of. We had so much movement during COVID with our families with high mobility, and we were missing kids. And so there's some concern about that too, just that we've missed them and they're somewhere else now, left our district because of having to move.
Thanks. Bruce, did you have a question?
Yes. How effective are you finding the caseworkers or the wraparound help?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think wraparound help, I worked at Simpson for a long time and provide a lot of the similar resources that the YMCA has been providing. And I will say that a lot of it depends on sort of where the family's at and what they're able to take in. So there's that factor. We also, so in general, I would say it's working great. Where we hit challenges are where we do have families that maybe aren't able to take advantage of some of the support that's available. And we also have had challenges with staff capacity. So hiring, as you all know, in a lot of different areas has been really challenging. So we've had some openings that have lasted longer than we would have hoped. And so that has created some challenges around that wraparound support. So when it works amazing, and it doesn't always work for many different reasons. And Bruce is like, I think Bruce, you probably still have the most families housed as a landlord, and we're super grateful to you for being an awesome landlord for Stable Homes.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And any other questions for Charlotte?
I'll just ask another quick one because I didn't see Jefferson on your list, but it used to be, right?
Jefferson it should be. Yep. I'll actually,
it wasn't
Katie,
on the list.
Katie, if you don't mind.
I have a bunch of places right there, right? So.
Yeah, no, Jefferson is on the list. Katie, if you don't mind, I need to update that. I kind of pulled from an old one and I need to update it and add the 2 schools. So don't share it yet. Or Joey, okay. Whoever's sharing it.
Sure. We'll wait till we hear from you that it's good to share.
Thanks.
And you said Marcy was added, right?
Marcy and Bancroft were added, yeah. Because of shifts that we saw after the comprehensive district design, we saw shifts in where our rates of homelessness were occurring. And so we needed to add Marcy and Bancroft.
Have you had to exit people out of the program?
Yeah, there have been some exits. Some because people found other sources of housing, even sometimes in the intake process. Some because they really weren't participating in the program. We weren't able to even stay in touch with them. So we have had people exit for a variety of reasons.
I have a question. Do you have Anderson on there?
Anderson was, but they switched to a middle school. And so,
Okay.
and this is a K-5 initiative. So they were one of the schools until they switched to a middle school this year.
Okay. And so it might be a little bit, I don't know, I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly. So do the stable school have anything to do with the rezoning of the schools? Like, so you said earlier that you lost some kids. So I'm curious if those same kids you lost because the district put them in different zones. Does that matter, or is that anything related to that?
No, so I'll try to answer, but if I'm not getting at what you're asking, just let me know. So when the redesign happened, there were a lot of students that switched schools. And so we sort of, within Stable Homes, we worked with every family to make a plan. So some students maybe moved, like when their zone changed, maybe they were no longer in a Stable Home, Stable Schools site, but we kept those families, even if they weren't in a Stable Home, Stable Schools site. So we do have some students in schools that are not Stable Home schools because of that. Like if it was a forced move due to CDD, we kept those students. I think you also might have been referencing like students that we lost in the identification process. And that's more about the mobility that we saw in the pandemic. So students who maybe like stayed MPS students, but were living in a different state at the time because of a not wanting to come into shelter and needing to double up with somebody in a different state. So those are students that then we would have lost now that we're back in session.
Okay, yeah, that makes a little bit more sense because I'm just trying to keep up with this part of it too. So I just want to make sure I'm asking the right questions. Thank you. What about what's the one school? Green Central. Is Green Central still on there?
Yep, Green is. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, feel free to reach out to me if other questions come up after.
Thanks, Charlotte. All right, so that brings us to the end of the agenda. We have a few meeting topic ideas for the coming meetings. I got an email from a committee member to some good questions about Minneapolis 2040 housing goals and what progress has been made. Looking forward to working with city staff to set up the right presenters to talk about that. If you have any other ideas for meeting topics, send them to me and Queen and Joey, and we'll work on getting them in. Queen, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Not at this time, but thank you.
All right, thanks.
Scott, is there any way to invite Keith Ellison to the next agenda item so we could talk about any, major updates, especially when that tenant landlord book, some of that stuff is just reprinted, does it? Some of that stuff is just reprinted, and I would like to see like the renters ordinance, stuff on there. But yeah, I would like to see if we can get Keith Ellison to probably, update us on what's going on within housing, and then, seeing his ideas on what things he can help as well on his end. So I think having him here will be nice too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we'll be able to get Keith himself, but we can try. And so someone from the Attorney General's office, I think would be good to talk about the renter landlord rights and responsibilities handbook. Yeah, that's a good idea. All right, I've added it to the list, and we'll talk about it with staff and Queen.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Greener. All right, thanks, anyone. Let's adjourn this meeting. We'll see you next on April 14th is the date of the April meeting. So thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Good
Yes,
evening.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.